So what we're going to do is just make a normal map out of this and bake it onto a single plane and have the same detail showing up with just one polygon. Okay, and that is easy to do. Make these line up like that. Okay, we're looking pretty good there. We look through the camera, see what kind of results we can get. In my particular job, and probably in the job of many different Archviz artists, I am often asked to model and render furniture and architecture with lots of little carved detail. This can be so important to adding those super fine details and that extreme realism to a scene, but they're also time consuming and sometimes really tedious to create. That is, unless you use a few tricks. In this video, I'll reveal a workflow that I've been using that I feel like really speeds up the process and makes it a lot easier and also produces really good results. And huge surprise, it uses Blender. I know I've been talking a ton about 3ds Max and its superiority, but it simply cannot compete with Blender in this one thing. But don't worry, Max can help us out as well. Let's just jump in and check out the workflow. One common thing that I end up having to model a lot is like classical frieze details. If you ever work on a building that has more of a classical design to it that has these kind of motifs, you would know what I'm talking about. And this can be really poly heavy and hard to create using poly modeling, and then really hard to repeat all around the room as much as it would need to be. And so there's a different way, and I think a better way. But this same technique can be used for all sorts of different details, like little rosette type of things. You can see if there's any kind of classical detailing, there's all sorts of carved stuff. But it doesn't have to be classical. Modern architecture can have carved details as well. These are just the ones that I come across a lot. And you'll see these motifs repeated in furniture and other things all the time as well. This is the one that I'm going to focus on, mostly this frieze detail down here. And you can see it repeats between here and here. So we're going to carve that, just that part of it, and I'll show you how we can make it repeat easily throughout our scene. So in Blender, the part that 3ds Max absolutely cannot compete with in Blender is its sculpting capabilities. And these sculpting capabilities exist in like ZBrush as well. In fact, ZBrush is probably even better at it. The nice thing though, in this case, is that Blender is fully capable of sculpting things for us, and it's totally free. So anyone can just get it and start sculpting in here. And sculpting is exactly what we need in this case. I'm going to clear out everything else in our scene. We don't need any of this, but we are going to create a basic plane. We can just go to add mesh plane. Okay, and then it needs to be subdivided a bunch so we can carve into it. And we're in object mode now, but we can just go into sculpt mode. Now, disclaimer here, I am no Blender pro. You guys can tell me in the comments about all the awesome Blender features that I'm totally missing or screwing up. Actually, you know what? Before we do anything, let's export this just as it is, because we need the basic object before we start sculpting on it. We need both of those objects when we go back into Max, and you'll see why. So just export this as an OBJ. I'll call it base model. Now let's start subdividing it. So add your modifier, subdivision surface. We want it as simple so it stays as a square, and we can say 5 maybe. Then we can just apply it. Apply modifier and remove from the stack. Basically burning in that subdivision. Now if we show in wireframe by going here and turning it on here, we can see the subdivisions. We need more subdivision. Let's do 4 more and see what happens. Okay, that's going to be plenty. That's insane. But that's good. We can use that to carve some really nice details. The more subdivided it is, the more quality you'll get in the detail of the sculpt, right? And poly count's not going to matter here in this workflow. We're not going to have, we're going to get all the detail using very low polygon count. Okay, so let's go to sculpt mode now. And in here, there's just kind of a few basic things we need to know. Let's turn off that wireframe. It's visually distracting. Okay, you can just sculpt right onto here. I do have a tablet, a pen tablet, and that makes this a lot easier. It'd be kind of hard to carve with a mouse, but it is doable. If you've done any sculpting before, you kind of know how this works. We just have our brushes over here, and we can make them do the opposite by holding down Control. So now it's cutting into the object, and now it's pulling out of the object, okay? And you'll see there's just a few tools that you need over here to start building up your sculpture. So let's look at the thing we want to sculpt again. Okay, I'm gonna move it off screen, but leave it on top of the video for you guys. But I'm just gonna be referencing it. And of course you can load this in as an image and all that stuff too, and trace over it, but I'm just gonna freehand it. And let's see, I'm gonna use maybe the clay. You'll see when you do this, it's just kind of adding clay on top. Okay, I'm gonna get the basic layout here. We have, let's see, do we need any symmetry? If you do want symmetry, it's up here. And this will do symmetrical carving across various different axes, right? Our thing is not completely symmetrical, although it kind of is if we look at it. Okay, I'm just going to start sculpting here, and I'll let you know of the relevant things that I'm doing. The size and fall off of your brush is important, and so is the strength. So the radius can be controlled here, the strength here. Different fall offs can be adjusted up here. Switch to the clay strips because it's giving more of that hard edge that I want. If you hold down Shift, it smooths out whatever you've done before. Just automatically switches to, and remember, Control cuts in. It does the inverse of whatever you were doing before. So there's Shift and Control that you need to know. And again, most of my sculpting experience is totally in ZBrush, but I'm just applying that knowledge here, and it basically translates for me. Okay, you can notice that I'm not being too precise here, and that's because you want to start off less precise, just kind of roughing things in, and then you can go in and you can spend a lot of time carving this and really working out the fine details of it, right? But you start rough, obviously. But B, because since I'm just demonstrating the workflow, this doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other element here. I just want to show you how this works so that you can go in and carve beautiful details yourself, and then know exactly what to do with it after that. However, I want you to think about, while I'm doing this, you might think, oh, well, this looks kind of tedious too, to get this exactly right. And you know, to get this exactly right, like exactly how the image is, yeah, that'd be pretty tedious. Holding down Shift and smoothing out that center. That is true, but what I will say is, first of all, polymodeling this would be insane, right? Not insanely hard, but just really tedious. It's doable. And this isn't the hardest detail ever, so maybe polymodeling would work here. The issue becomes how much geometry that's going to add into your scene and how hard it is to kind of manage and copy around. That's an issue, but also I think it would take longer, actually. When you get good at this carving stuff, it can go quite fast. And I will say also that this detail is never going to need to be perfect, right? It represents a hand carved thing, so some imperfections. I mean, we're kind of hand carving it here, so some imperfections are okay. And it's probably going to be adding detail, but not like the star of your scene, right? So you probably won't see it right up close. So getting it pretty close to what you need is probably good enough. Okay, let me show you a few other tools here that might come in handy. There's the flatten tool, which is always nice, where you can kind of make things more hard-edged maybe. There's also the crease tool and the draw sharp tool. So that's cutting into it. If you want kind of a ridge here, you can hold down Control with the draw sharp tool and then maybe smooth, and that could create like an edge or a point that this stuff comes to. I think the flatten, get in here and flatten some of this, and then draw some edge on it. There's the crease tool, which kind of carves lines straight into that thing. If you hold down Control with that, you can sharpen it up and then flatten it. So that can get more of a hard edge on there, right? We could put a crease right down the center, like that with the crease brush. That works quite well right there. Okay, I can go clean up all this stuff. So I'll just do that real quick using these same tools. So you see I only used a few brushes, a few different techniques, and sculpting's pretty easy in here. Okay, I'm gonna go with this. It's not perfect, obviously. I've left a lot of things loose, but it's gonna be totally functional and working perfectly to demonstrate the workflow that I want to without any issues at all. So let's just run with this and I'll show you where we can go from here. Okay, once we're ready to export, we just export the exact same plane we did before, but now with the sculpting on it. So we'll just do the same thing, export as wavefront, object, OBJ, and then we'll take it into Max. So essentially, we just downloaded a free software, Blender, to use its fantastic sculpting tools, and now we're going to use those sculpting tools to our advantage in 3ds Max. This is the same workflow I would do with ZBrush, but anyone that's done that knows that ZBrush costs money and is also super confusing. So to me it is anyway. But point is, you can do it really easily and for free with Blender, and that's awesome. So let's see how we can use this in 3ds Max. Okay, so in 3ds Max, let's just start by importing our two objects, the plane one and the sculpted one. Base model, import. Sculpted model, import. And we'll call it underscore sculpted. Oh, we sculpted the wrong way. Ha. That won't matter. Now you can see that the sculpting looks pretty cool even in Max, just as it is, right? You could copy this around and use that as your detail if you wanted. That would be super heavy. Look at that. Okay, and not necessarily practical to copy all over the scene. So what we're going to do is just make a normal map out of this and bake it onto a single plane and have the same detail showing up with just one polygon. Okay, and that is easy to do. If you've never done texture baking before in 3ds Max, this will probably be a little bit foreign to you, but it's actually super easy. So all we need to do is put a projection modifier on this thing, the base model. Okay, projection, and we need to make sure that it's projecting high enough up so that it can catch all of this detail. Okay, so we need to pick the reference geometry. We're projecting this more sculpted thing onto the simpler model. Okay, so we pick this plane, the plane sculpted, as the reference geometry. And then we just need to make sure the cage is up high enough so that it is taking everything in. So you can see that cage kind of raising up through the sculpted model. Make sure it's taking in everything. So it's got to be above the sculpted model like that. Okay, it's hovering just above. So it's going to project downward, pick up all these details, and be able to apply it to that plane down below. Okay, once we have our projection set up, and we can do this with any kind of object. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a plane. This cage just has to take in all the detail that you want to be projecting. And then we're just going to bake it. To bake, you go to Render to Texture. In here, there's just a few settings we need to have figured out. Actually, we need to go into our render settings first. Make sure we're not rendering with V-Ray, but we're rendering with Scanline Renderer. And then in the renderer settings, enable global super sampler. Okay, that's it there. Then in here, we need to enable projection. We already have the projection modifier on there, so it will know that. And then we need to say add normal modifier or a normal map. Okay, so that we're adding that to our list of things we want rendered here. Okay, so select normals map, add elements. It'll come right here. And then we just have settings for it. We can make it big, 2048 by 2048. We don't need to apply it to a material or anything like that. Up here, this is an important thing. Both objects need to be unwrapped using the exact same unwrap. So you would unwrap first and then add the detail and then make sure both objects remain the same. Or you can use this automatic unwrap here, which will, that's why it's important these are the same objects. So it will know how to figure out the UVs exactly and make it work. I'm just going to use automatic unwrap here, and we're talking about a plane, so that's a very simple unwrap going on. Okay, but you will get unpredictable and weird results if the UVs don't match on both the objects. Now we just need to tell it where to save. Okay, so it's ready to save, and then we should just be able to hit render now. Let's see. Oh, one thing I need to do. Hold on. I'm going to get rid of all my standard render elements here because I don't want those all rendering. Okay. Render. Following elements do not specify a target map slot. That's fine. We're not really making a material out of this yet. So, continue. It'll take its time to render here. Okay, so that's what it was rendering. But it also should have generated our normal map if we go and look. In my folder, there's a plain normals map targa. If we open it, there it is. There's our normal map. And it's actually super clean and pretty. Looks just like my sculpting. Now, we can apply this as a map in 3ds Max. Get that detail repeating perfectly just as we sculpted it. And we don't have to use a ton of polys. So let's check out how that works. I'm going to rotate this and crop it quickly in Photoshop. Okay, so we now have a perfect normal map of this, and it's pretty sweet looking. So let's just set up a little scene over here. I'm going to actually, let's see, I'll save this and start a new scene. Okay, and back in my typical V-Ray scene, we'll just make a little example molding, and then we will add that freeze onto it using a normal map. Okay, super simple. Let me just set up a scene real fast. Okay, I'm setting up my little scene here. I have two different materials, really both into a multi-sub-object material. It's these two materials, just a wood I got from Cosmos, and then a wood from Cosmos that I adjusted and added the normal map to. Okay, if you've never done this before, pretty simple. I just added in the bump slot a V-Ray normal map, and then in the normal map slot, you add your normal map, like that. And I've set it up to map differently so that I can independently control it from the other material. I set the normal map here to 10 so we can exaggerate it and really see it. And left the bump over here. Oh, the bump over here is at 200. Yeah, that's okay, I guess. Okay, so I set this to map channel 2 and this to map channel 1. And this one's just using real world mapping, and this one I'm mapping manually right now. And I've got them as two different material IDs too. So this is material ID 1, this is material ID 2. In here, we'll just have to set up this tile so that it tiles correctly around that cylinder, something like that. And then we can do something similar for the corner piece here. We'll just apply that same multi-sub-object material. It can be mapped on map channel 1 with real world as a box. And then on map channel 2, we need to add an edit poly modifier here and make this ID number 2. Set ID 2. Right now it's got the normal map on there, or the normal mapped material, and then we can add one more box, not real world, map channel 2, and then we'll fit this box to be the right size. The width will need to be something like that, and the length will have to be something like that, and then we need to adjust it to kind of fit in that corner properly. So make these line up like that. Okay, we're looking pretty good there. If we look through the camera, See what kind of results we can get. Okay, I set up a scene that is basically working now, and I can show you the results, but let me show you a few things that I had to do first to make it work. And these aren't totally necessary, but they enhanced my detail and made it look better. The one thing is the setup for the bump map. I just have it as a normal bump map, and in here it's just this sculpture. Okay, I had to set the normal map to -10 because it was looking inverted. Bump is just at 30 here. Okay, if I render that, it looks like this. On the round surface, it looks really, really good. Right here, it falls apart a little bit as it goes around a corner because it's not actually projecting there, right? Over here in this corner, it's working really well again. And in my opinion, from the distance that this would usually be viewed, or at the scale which it would usually be viewed, this is going to look really, really good. So if this is on an architectural frieze way up high in a room, and you just need it to read as detail, this is going to read very well from far away, especially on flatter surfaces, because you won't get this effect as you go around a corner. And you can see it looks exactly like I sculpted it. Now, if I put this to 10 and rendered it, you'll see that it looks a little different. I'll render a little region. So you may have to toy with that. Okay, it looks like it's carved into the wood now. But you can get both effects depending on how you set your normal map. Okay, so there's not much else to it. Put this back to -10. The only other thing I did was I cheated a little bit, and in Photoshop, I took this normal map and painted some dark edges around this thing to accentuate it a little bit. That map looks like this. Okay, so I used the normal map in Photoshop to paint some dark edges, just to give me a basis to paint on. And then I multiplied that using a composite map, multiplied it onto the normal diffuse map. And that makes it pop out a little more. Let's just look at the difference. So with it on, it looks like this. If we turn it off, like so, and then render again, it just looks like that. Okay, so it accentuates it slightly better to add this in, and I think it's a nice detail. It really makes it read really nicely, like over here and stuff, because you get that little kind of darkness around your detail, which makes it pop out. Okay, but that's really all there is to it. This is way easier. I mean, modeling this, taking a sculpted model and copying it around here, or polymodeling it and copying around an object like this, would be an enormous pain, and it would be huge amounts of polygons. This normal map does the trick really well, all things considered, and of course it's much easier to manage in your scene. So if you like that workflow, let me know in the comments. If you think there's something I could do better that could improve this workflow even more, let me know that too. I'd love to experiment. Let me know if you're already doing something like this, or if you're doing something else for these kind of situations. But overall, thanks for watching. If you're interested in learning more about 3ds Max or V-Ray or the entire process of Archviz workflows, just check out the links below for free resources and massively discounted courses. And as always, subscribe if you want more Archviz workflow stuff, articles, information, news, tutorials, all things having to do with Archviz. If you're into Archviz, subscribe. Thanks a lot. I'll see you in the next video.